Welcome to the Advisor Webcast Framework Folders for WebCenter Content Conference Call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. There will be a presentation followed by a question and answer session, at which time telephone participants will need to press 1 on their telephones to ask a question. I must advise you that this conference is being recorded today, Wednesday the 13th of March 2013. And now I'd like to hand the conference over to your first speaker for today, Torben Hein. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Henry. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Torben, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Advisor Webcast Framework Folders for WebCenter Content 11G. Today is Cordell Malgard. He's the Senior Principal Technical Support Engineer with Oracle. We also have Betty Reel online to join us during the Q&A session. Today's Advisor Webcast to last approximately 60 minutes. This will include a brief Q&A session. Attendees can ask questions via the Q&A panel. This looks on the right side of your screen. Phone attendees can also ask questions directly during the Q&A session, which will be managed by the operator. Today's presentation in PDF format and session recording will be available for download in about 2 days at my Oracle Advisor Webcast Schedule and Archive with document ID 740966.1 in the KM in the knowledge base. This note will be shown at the end of our conference again, and you will also receive a mail after this reminder, which is pointing you to this note, so there's no need to take the number. If you're experiencing any problems with voice streaming, or if you want to participate in the Q&A session on the phone, you can dial in to the teleconference at any time. You can see the conference details here or from the WebEx menu. Select Communicate, Teleconference, Join Teleconference, and a pop-up window appears with dial-in instructions. For team numbers, please refer to note 11486001. This number is available from the Join Teleconference pop-up window as well. In terms with the audio streaming, please close the audio broadcast box and reopen it via Join Audio Broadcast. If this doesn't help, please close your browser and reconnect to the WebEx session, or simply join the teleconference. Here's instructions about the Q&A panel. The screen shows the position of the Q&A panel. Please type your question here. Do not use the default, which is all panelists, because questions sent to individuals cannot be taken into consideration during the Q&A, and press the send button. Send your question to the panelist, and the question appears up here. No questions will be answered immediately in written form. Technical questions will be queued and answered after the presentation during the Q&A session. Please note that this Advisor Webcast is intended for information purposes only. Any features or functionality described for Oracle's product remain at the sole discretion of Oracle. Go ahead. When you're ready, I'll turn the webcast over to you and you begin.
Thank you very much, Torben. Good day, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for attending our Framework Folders WebCenter Content Webcast. Just to go over the agenda for today. This presentation is designed for anybody that's either new to folders or for people that are migrating from a previous version of folders, such as Folders G. We're going to talk about what are folders, what is folders, reason for a new folders implementation that we will be discussing today, the look and feel, cuts and links, content, how to search for content and folders, what query and retention folders are, metadata propagation is, how to copying files and folders, what pool or user folders are, and then some slides about migrating from Folders G to the new framework folders, and then I mentioned the question and answer at the end. Folders and why use folders? Well, folders are primarily to organize the content. Much like operating systems such as Windows has folders that you would organize content into or files into. Same similar concept here for WebCenter content. For organization, navigation, structure, and for product compatibility. What that means is for use with other products such as WebDAV, we need a folders structure. Inside WebCenter content are what's called virtual folders. They do organizing principle for files. Their interface is hierarchical, and they're not dependent on the location in the physical file system. In other words, these actual directories on the file system that are getting created, these are just virtual folders to act as organization. And the slide shows of that. So it's a picture of the new framework folders interface and show what the folders would look like, and then shows you content below and the virtual folders that are in here. So about the history of folders briefly here. For those of you that come from the old product, the Stellent product, we had folders back in the 7.x days of the Stellent product. Those are some early implementation, and back then it was just called folders. When we did the 10G product in Stellent, we created the folders G and consolidated a bunch of code that we had to make things a little more streamlined. What then is we had several different components that you needed to use. We could combine them into less components to make it a lot easier. The Oracle acquisition, G continued along and had some enhancements and bug fixes along the way. When we went to the 11G Oracle product, which we have now, Folder G continued to be developed and continued to be used. Had some limitations that we'll talk about. Now in PS5, and for those of you who do not know, that's patch set 5 of 11G, we have framework folders, which is now the initial implementation and the reason for this webcast. Roadmap, for those of you still curious, we still have Folders G. It is still available, but Framework Folders is the recommended folder solution moving forward. Our reasons for a new Folders implementation, or kind of what this project was all about. One thing that we addressed was some performance and scalability issues when using Folders G. Folders G did not perform well at high volumes of content or number of items inside of the folders. Issues with the browser, and also just some performance issues from a database standpoint that we wanted to address. All because the Folder G was kind of an extension of the original folders, we want to redesign a new folders implementation from scratch to make it easier to maintain and patch. So limitations in Folders G were there was no support for personal folders, no support for query folders, limits on the number of subfolders and folder items provided were problematic for some customers. The concept of a maximum number of items per folder with Folders G. In UCM 10G, which is the Universal Content Management, or WebCenter Content 10G, it had a default of 1,000, but that could be increased. Then to WebCenter Content 11G, on logic, that was coded at 1,000 and could not be increased. It's presented to be problematic with some customers, and that's one of the main reasons that Framework Folders was designed. Framework Folders has an unlimited number of content items. This is really a desirable feature for lots of customers. Just note that even though the limit could be increased back in the 10G days, it could still lead to some performance issues, especially on the database side. So about how to enable the Framework Folders component. The Framework Folders component is just a standard component like many other components that you'd be used to with Universal Content Management or WebCenter Content. Installed with the ECM patch set 5, which is the 11.116 project. The disabled by default, along with Folders G. Both of the components will be disabled, and then enable it through the standard component manager in the browser or the application, which we also call the component wizard, where you can enable the Framework Folders component. It's only supported from 11.116 and onward, or PS5 and onward. In order to get the component, customers will need to upgrade to 11.116 to get the component. Simply get a copy of the component and install it on an earlier version of WebCenter Content. It's recommended that the latest O-patch be installed because some bugs were addressed in the last few months that are included in later O-patches that weren't included in the initial offering of PS5 when 11.116 came out. and framework folders components should not be used at the same time except during the migration process, which we will talk about at the end of the presentation. If you have both components enabled, some things will not work properly, such as WebDAV and some other things that aren't supported or will not work. So run into issues. In order to get to the new folders after you enable the component, it's as simple as logging in as a Browse Content menu. Underneath there, you will click on Folders. Please, old framework, the folders G, this was a list that was called Contribution Folders. That's now just been renamed to Folders. The new framework folders is also being referred to as just folders. So if you see that in some other slides from marketing or other literature, it will just be called folders. Framework folders for the sake of this presentation, just so we can differentiate between this and the folders G component that some people will be upgrading from. There's a new look and feel for framework folders versus the folder G. The folders are separated from the documents in two distinct navigation panels. The top will show you the folders, and the bottom will show you the files for whatever folder that you are in. Inside the screenshot, if you look at the very top, where there's a little folder that's open and then a slash, that's showing you the context of where you are currently at. In this case, this is the root folder of the folders component. It shows you that there is some content residing inside that root folder right now, which is listed down below. Notice there's also some different icons. You'll see that we'll talk about this, but next to the users folder, that's a little print icon, and then also a magnifying glass icon. We'll talk about that. That's related to a query folder, which we'll get to as well. So note that there will be some different icons that you might see on some of the folders, and those designate what type of folder that it is. So two distinct view options for the content that's inside the folders. This provides these two options for viewing the content items in the folders. The first is all items, which means the latest revision of each document is displayed. And this will be published items, which is the just released revisions of documents are displayed. These same revisions that are returned in a normal search result listing, and it's probably what most people are used to when they're viewing a list of items inside of WebCenter content. That menu is shown right when you go into a folder. It'll be across the top. These are the menus that you see: View, Add, Edit, and Search. You then switch between the two modes as desired, and that action will remain in effect until it is explicitly changed. Also a new technology or a new process for viewing more files in folders. Folders G, we had a concept of pagination, where you had a list of the current items, and you could go to a certain page. In framework folders, we have the concept of the load more files. This is to other web technologies, such as Facebook or something else you might be familiar with, where you view the next results on the page. You simply click load more posts, or in this case, we click on load more files. That display an additional 50 items, or however many items you have that defined to, if there are present that many items in that folder. Now, the number per page load can be increased or decreased depending on your desire. So used to show several hundred on the first initial load, which will then come to hit the load more files less often, or others might choose to show fewer to make that initial load a little bit quicker, and then load more as they need. Those are two parameters that you can then change. Folder default files load count and the folder default folders load count. Notice the difference. One is for files, one is for the number of folders. Those are standard configuration entries. You would add those into the configuration CFG file or through the browser when you load that in, and then you need to restart the managed server for those to take effect. Those are in the documentation, which we'll be discussing at the end. The next concept I want to talk about is shortcuts and links. This concept of creating a shortcut, which a shortcut is really just think of it as a link to another folder. They view it at the bottom of the content information page. When you click on the bottom of that document information page, and you see a picture of it down there at the bottom. Then you to put shortcuts or links to other content throughout that is stored in other folders through repository. There's several different things listed there. One is a file, and then there's a shortcut to different files depending on where that's located. You can place these shortcuts to any of the other content that's in there. We only have one primary folder link, but any number of shortcut links which are secondary. A shortcut simply provides a path to the folder or the document. It's much like just a link to it. Delete shortcut then does not delete the actual file. Think of this as much like an operating system shortcut or a symlink, or something that you would create in Windows would just be a shortcut to something as well. Like shortcut to launch a program doesn't actually delete the program. However, deleting the original file does delete all the shortcuts that appear to it. You create shortcuts from the Folders action menu to documents and folders and place them in other folders, including the user folder, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So talk about the action menu. What we mean there is on the listing of when you see the files, to the right of every file is two icons. One takes you to the document information page, which is that circle I, and the other brings up this action menu to do different things to that file, like update the content information, create a shortcut, rename, move, copy, or delete it. When you create a shortcut, we'll have an arrow on them. So the icon will be different, so then you can quickly identify that that is just a shortcut link, shortcut folder. A few minutes and talk about deleting content that is inside of folders. In Folders G, we had this concept of a trash folder. Trash folder was almost like a recycle bin for certain operating systems. When you deleted something, it went into this special folder. Deleted using the folders action now is set to expired status rather than be deleted and put into this trash folder. Content that's deleted using other methods would still be deleted. Methods being the delete link from the document information page for a piece of content would actually delete it. So it's important to know contextually where you are at when you are doing that delete. The advantage with this versus having the trash folder is that expired content will not show up in searches. So for those of you that had Folders G in the past or are going to use it, when you do a delete in Folders G and put something into the trash folder, that would still show up in a search, and it would have the folder listed as the trash folder. This was a little misleading for customers, and I didn't want the normal search results to be polluted with stuff that was in the trash folder. So rather than put something in the trash folder, we now will expire it instead. Expiring the content is simply setting it to a different status other than released, so to manage that content differently. Expired content can then be unexpired if you want, or further deleted if desired. One way to view expired content can be through the repository manager, also in the browser. There's a search for expired content. This talks about the different delete actions because it's going to be important for users to understand what happens when they delete from certain places. So you're deleting from the Folders action menu. Again, will show up for every piece of content that's inside of a folder. You'll have this action menu. When you delete from that folder's action menu, that will expire the content. However, you're on the document information page for that same piece of content, and you use the delete link there, that actually delete the content. That's simply expiring it. So understand this difference of what might come into play. Let's talk about folders and how they work with content profiles. So that might not be familiar what a content profile is. It's a way to organize metadata to make ins and searches easier and kind of customized for your needs. So it allows you to set a group of rules that act on metadata fields to essentially group content in a certain way. Example of a typical profile is when you're checking in a certain type of document. Say we're checking in a piece of documentation or checking in a purchase order. You have different metadata or fields that need to be filled out for that particular check-in. That can be aligned and created with what's called a content profile. Content profile then will show up in different places. One place that it is used in conjunction with is the folder's application or the folder's component. Values and rules can then be applied to content checked into the folder. What would be really useful is something like our desktop integration suite or through WebDAV. Dragging content or dropping content into a specific folder, and I want a specific set of rules to be applied to that folder based on a certain profile. Very convenient feature and allows you to create and use a lot of the existing metadata to your benefit when you're doing check-ins. The profile for a particular folder is set on the metadata values form under the Switch Profile menu. Remember those menus we had across the top, the View, Add, Edit, and Search? So one of the menus is the Edit menu, and one of them underneath the Edit menu is this metadata values. The values form that comes up will specify the metadata values that you want applied to this particular folder, and you can pick the profile that then is in use. So this works hand in hand with existing profiles that you already have created, and is a very nice integration in order to use the profiles with the folders. Now let's talk about searching for folders and then searching for files. There is a specific folder search form that comes up when you want to search for particular folders. That I have a default of folder 1 that comes up here, and search for certain folders, and it'll default to sort it by the folder name down below. That I can search for particular folders. On the next page here, we have searching for files inside of folders. There's a file search form that comes up. Notice, likewise, I'm starting from the folder 1 folder, and this would only search for content that's inside of that folder 1 folder. Specify different metadata that would be available here. And then notice that the sorting is by file name by default. Bottom. The main question you're probably going to ask is, can we do a recursive search or search within subfolders that are defined within another folder? The answer is yes, and that's what this slide will talk about. So steps, however, that you need in order to use this feature. So you must have the Oracle Text Search installed and configured, and there are steps in order to get that configured if you're not using Oracle Text Search as your indexing and search engine. You can find out if you are using this by the simple configuration page under WebCenter content. It will show you that the search engine that's in use and say Oracle Text Search. If this is not, and you would like this feature, There are steps in place in order to switch over to Oracle Text Search, and these have been covered in previous webcasts. So it gives you the ability to search for files within a folder and all of the subfolders. Available on the standard search page, and there's a simple Include Subfolders checkbox there. To this functionality, the recursive content search, you add this folders index parent folder values equals true to the CFG, like we did before for those other configuration entries. You would then need to restart the managed server, and you would need to rebuild your search index. And that is, you are adding the path to that particular file and its folder path to index. So it needs to have that so it can include those subfolders. This will allow you to do a recursive folder search from an existing folder and include all of the subfolders that are underneath, but it's only for content. The concept we're going to talk about is something called query folder. Queries are very similar to saved searches. We have a few advantages, and then we'll talk about what they really are coming up. So each time you access a folder, you actually initiate the query associated with the folder once you've defined one of these query folders. A query being a criteria that would define what files you want brought back. Click on that folder, much like a saved search. The query folder are the dynamic content items that are returned by that query. Like all content search, query folders only display items that have been released. They also are filtered by specific security. So the standard content server security would still be in play here, meaning you're not going to be able to find content that you are not authorized for within a query folder. Query folders contain only actual repository content items returned by query. Folders and shortcuts are not included in the contents of query folders. The main advantage of query folders versus a saved search is a saved search is specific to each individual person. An easy way to share out that saved search. With a query folder, you can define that criteria search within a specific folder, and then anyone that goes into that folder would have that saved search or that query folder available to them. They clicked it, but essentially, if they have the same security, see the same items that were listed for that saved search. It's a very complex criteria search that you want over and over. Query folders are a great way to do that. There's also a few other advantages which we'll talk about next. So I create a query folder. Well, there's two methods. Here's method number one. Remember that view, add, edit, and search menu we talked about before? Well, this is done under the add menu. You go to a folder where you want the query folder stored. It's important to remember that method one is find the location of where you want this query folder to be found or stored. Then you would simply click on Add New Query Folder under the Add menu. You give it a name and the criteria that you want items to come back that would match. It's important to have some kind of naming convention for query folders to designate that they're different than normal content folders as well. So here in the folder name that in the screenshot, we put a Q of that, and author is WebLogic for that particular folder that I defined. Method number one, to reiterate, is find where you want it, then go create your query folder, and then give it its criteria. Method two is to conduct the search from the standard or profile search page first. So method two is to find the content that you want, defining a search and narrowing it and specifying the criteria. Then under the search actions from the search results listing, you simply pick create query folder from that menu. If you haven't told it where you want that folder to be stored, the next box that's going to pop up is going to ask you to choose the folder location and the name of where you want that query folder to be stored. And the second screenshot that we have there. Some advantages of using query folders. One nice thing is you're able to perform mass metadata updates using the propagate functionality. We'll propagate in a little bit, but the version of propagate is specifying certain values for metadata fields and having them flow through a big list of contents all at once. So do a mass update of metadata values. Query folders are very handy to allow you to do that. You can view that saved search using the Desktop Integration Suite because it will show up as a folder in the Desktop Integration Suite. Then perform mass deletions using Desktop Integration Suite by going to that saved search and deleting all of that content. You save a search and have the results displayed in a folder. That simple create query folder option from the search results page. And then that I neglected to put on here, but I previously mentioned, is the ability to share that query folder with others without having to define anything special. Just create a query folder will allow others to see it as long as they have the proper security. I'll talk about the propagation functionality that's included. So propagation is the act of changing metadata values for multiple content items. The value that is allowed to be changed can be propagated. Examples, content ID cannot be propagated. A blank value can be propagated to clear the associated values from sub-items. So a feature, if you want to blank out a bunch of values for something that does not exist anymore, so say for example you have product category or product ID as your fields, but that product is no longer available, like get that product out of that particular meta value so you can blank it all out for a certain number of content. So you do a search where the product ID equals a certain value, find those content items, then through propagation you can blank them all out to remove it very quickly. We'll change the metadata values on both the folders and the content sub-items by default. Propagate to folders only option, which restricts the changes to folders only, and the content is then unchanged. So a folder propagation option, which overrides the folder's inhibit settings, so values will be changed, even if the inhibit propagation is set on the folder. Discuss these two in further detail on the next slide. So two methods to do metadata propagation. Method one is to select the metadata fields and specify the values to propagate from the metadata available for the current folder. Again, on the View, Edit, and Search menus, this is under the Edit menu. You edit and you go to Propagate. So then specify the particular values that you want to change. Propagate. Now, important to note that you do have to check the checkbox to the left of each field in order to make that change. This acts as kind of like a confirmation because you wouldn't want to blank out every value every time you hit propagate if you didn't specify certain values. By leaving the box unchecked next to each field, it leaves those values unchanged. But checking the box to the left of each field, it will then change those values. To note, if you check the box on type, for example, and type is left blank, that you will then be propagating a blank value to every item that matches the particular folder that you have specified. Method 2 involves creating a query folder with the criteria of the desired items to change. So this would be very useful if the content in the folder that you need to propagate is out amongst many different folders. You could create the query folder, then navigate to that query folder, and then edit and click on propagate. Then the steps would still be the same. You'd select the metadata fields and specify the new values, which propagate the items that match the query folder search criteria. It would be very desirable for people that want to do a mass metadata update without using Archiver. The mentioned recommended this was through the Archiver application, which would need to archive all the content out, and you could archive it all back in and perform that mass metadata update. A lot less intrusive method of doing the same thing, but just changing the values. There are some additional propagation options. Here, when you go to the propagate page, there propagate to folders only, which would then allow that only to be changed on folders. It will not affect the content. So what would be handy is if you want to change about folders values for when using desktop integration or WebDAV, you could then do that and only do that for folders. There's this concept of force the propagation, which overrides that inhibit propagation on all items and folders. The inhibit propagation prevents those from being changed. You can set that in propagation, but this will allow you to override that setting. So, nice feature to be able to make a quick change and override that propagation. Now about retention folders. So retention folders provide lightweight records management retention features using folders functionality built in. These admin-defined query folders with additional retention information, some number of revisions to retain, and the time frame which to retain them. Keep for a certain number of weeks, months, quarters, or years. So you see here, when I create that query folder, I'm going to specify that retention definition at the bottom. Revisions to keep, and then long to keep for them. Time frame hits, or when that schedule comes to the next slide, then the items would be removed. The scheduling of the retention folders. And this page, you use the Configure Schedule Jobs page under the Folders Retention Administration menu. So simple menu item under Administration to go to Folders Retention Administration, and then brings up this page, which allows you to pick the calendar or the scheduled job to run the particular retention. Also an immediate Run Now buttons next to each of those things. So this is, let's say every month you want to remove all revisions that are greater than 5, you do that and simply this calendar keep update to that and run this every month. This is to talk about moving or copying files. So content folders can be moved or copied from one folder to another with a menu that comes up. So you find the item, and remember we have a folders action menu. You can move or copy from that folders action menu, which would then bring up this particular dialog. You would select the destination folder and desired options that you would like. You do that move copy. At the bottom, and you notice in the screenshot, there's a show advanced options. The next slide will talk about those advanced options and where we might run into conflicts. Because there can only be one item in each folder with the same name, we need options for what's happened if you try to move an item into that folder. The option is the auto-propagate, which sets value on the content to those set on the new folder. So moving an item into a folder that has different metadata, we can change the metadata of the item to match the metadata that's in the new folder. Now, there are three main options if the same file exists. To resolve the conflicts, the items are going to be renamed, much like in certain operating systems. You'll get a copy of the name of your item that's put in there. That's if you chose to resolve conflicts. If you override, it will delete the original file and replace it with a new one. If you skip it, then if you run a conflict, that item will not be moved. And as you hear, these are radio buttons, so they're mutually exclusive. Step is this personal or user folders. Of users is created at the root level when you install framework folders. It can personal folders for each user that logs in. Accessible from the My folder under My Content Server menu. Each can only see his or her own personal folder. The ability for users to create new files, folders, or shortcuts inside of personal folders and apply certain content server security to them. And important to note that the content is not hidden from other users. This is not a way for you to create a personal folder and store all your own stuff in there and have it automatically secured. This is simply a way for you to create shortcuts, essentially, to common items that already exist inside the repository, and then you want to just tag and put inside your user folder. Still, content server security still applies. So if an item in your user folder that has secure public, then anybody with public can still see that item. It's that you have that item inside of your folder now as well. Is migrating from folders G to framework folders. This is a pretty easy process, and there's only a couple steps. On an existing version of folders G, you have framework folders, the existing folders, folders G. I mentioned early on that you cannot have folders G and framework folders enabled at the same time, except during this particular migration. You will need both of them enabled at this time. Two main scenarios in which you will be doing this. You're already running folders G on 11.1.1.6 and move to the new framework folders. Folders G running on another 10G or 11G instance, and you want to migrate these to the framework folders on the new instance. Note, you will be using the folder structure archiver to move the actual folders between one system and another. This new system would need folders G on it as well, and once it gets there, you would enable framework folders and then use the migration assistant. Migration utility under the administration menu, the ability to exclude certain folders. It will give you the history of migration runs available for future audit, and you can delete these migration runs to delete the folders that were migrated previously. This is a way to kind of test out migration. You can continue to do it until such time as you've refined it to include the folders that you wish to be migrated. The slide I had for you is just that there is some documentation for this particular folders compatibility and functionality. Content Application Administrator's Guide, Chapter 6 is using folders in WebDAV. There's a System Administrator's Guide for Content Server, System Migration and Archiving, the G Migration to Folders, and the WebCenter Content Services Reference Guide, which talks about the new folder services available. At this, we will now move into the community Q&A follow-up. This Q&A session, we will also create a following thread in Web Content Community, frame holders for Web Center content, question and answers. Use this thread for remaining questions after the Q&A, and monitor this thread and provide follow-up at this location. Okay, we'll turn it back over to you for questions.
Yes. Thank you, Cadell. Sorry, I think I took that away before you expected. Okay, we'll follow up or advance this into the Q&A session now. First of all, I'd like to take a second here to remind people how they can access the communities to actually participate in the Q&A session in case you are listening to the recording or in case that you have additional follow-up questions later on once the Q&A has finished. For that, log on to My Oracle Support. You'll find a link or a tab that says Community. If you follow that, select WebCenter Content Community in the My Communities, and you can participate in the Q&A here. Brief reminder here how to ask questions about the Q&A panel. We will start with the questions from the telephone lines to allow people to type in their questions to the Q&A panel. So, Arita, if you could please remind our listeners how they ask questions via the phone lines.
Thank you. A reminder to all telephone participants, if you wish to ask a question, please press star followed by 1 on your telephone and wait for your name to be announced. That's star 1 to ask a question. Your phone comes from Neil Kataros. Please hit.
Hi there. We're using Folders G on 11.116, and we're also using WebCenter Spaces, also patch set 5 as part of our solution. Is Framework Folders compatible or going to be compatible with WebCenter Spaces?
The answer is that it will definitely be compatible. There is work going on right now to get that certified and supported. It is not currently available, but it will be available in the future. Tentatively, it's planned for 12C, but as you know, things can change, so we can't dedicate any specific time frame. But they are definitely working on it, and we get updates monthly on the progress.
Again, it's star 1 to ask a telephone question. Questions registered by the phone at this point, please continue.
Okay, thank you. Just let me know if anybody comes in with a question. We'll start with things from the beginning. First question came in very early in the process from Satish Kusuru. Until when is 11G support available? I assume that refers to the Oracle lifetime policy. Do you know until when 11G will be supported?
Yes, so it goes by the version number. So there are specific grace periods according to the Fusion Middleware lifetime support policy for Premier support and extended support. There's a KM note out there that defines the grace periods for each version, such as 11.114, 11.115, and 11.116. The best thing to do is, if you want to follow up with a specific version, is check with that KM note on those particular grace periods.
Can you put that note into the thread in the community?
Yep, I'll absolutely do that.
Okay, such can get the answer from there then. Next question coming in from Christopher Owens. Will framework folders be made compatible with WebCenter Spaces in the future? I think you just answered that. Is that correct?
Yes, the answer covered that, and the answer is yes.
Okay. A question coming from Satish Kusuru as well. Is JDK 1.6 supported with the WebLogic 12C?
I'm not sure how that relates directly to framework folders, but I believe that would be best addressed with the WebLogic support folks. I am not sure of the direct correlation of the JDK with WebLogic.
Yeah, I guess you can just look up certification or ask a question in the WebLogic community for that. Next question coming in from Kevin Smith. When will WebCenter portal support framework folders? I think that's, again, same thing.
Yep, same thing under the spaces. Yep.
Okay. Seems to be rather popular.
Yep.
Is an option to always delete content rather than expiring it?
This is Betty Rail. I'm assisting Cordell with answering some of these questions. And currently, no, there is not an option to always delete. Right now, the only option, if you click delete from the folder's action menu, is to expire the content. This can always be requested as an enhancement. If you feel this should be added, you can open a service request, and we can open an enhancement request for that.
Okay, I'll jump 2 questions ahead. There was another question coming in from Dave Chaffee. If the actions are actually different, what will be why is it called delete instead of expire when you click it?
Yeah, that's a good question, but even in folders G, we called it delete, even though it was actually a move. In folders G, when you deleted content, you had an option to either delete permanently or to send it to the trash folder. By default, it went to the trash folder. When you click delete in folders G, it did delete the content. It really did a move of the content item to the trash folder. So it was not a delete then either. But then I don't know developments reasoning why they called it delete instead of expired, but it could always be opened an enhancement request that be changed, or the option to change it.
I think more users would know the concept of what delete means rather than expire. That might create more questions than it answers.
Possibly, yeah. I'll take those questions off as answered. Question from Skip Bouchard. Is there a facility for editing the action menus without directly editing the component code?
Fortunately, at this time, you would need to create a custom component customization to be able to change that actions menu.
Okay. Yeah. For example, disabling the delete function if he doesn't want that to be visible.
Right. Yep. You would still need to do that. Now, the good news is that component would not be very difficult to create.
Okay. There is documentation how to do that. Nicholas Sander came in with a question. Users will be confused when delete action behaves differently depending on where UI the user selects it. I would suggest to use different tables for the 2 different actions.
Yep, so it's basically the same question, and what we do is we'll make sure that product management receives the feedback, since multiple people seem to have the same concern with delete versus expire, so we'll pass that on as well as feedback.
Okay. Next question coming in from Lee Cornelison. Can you lock a folder to one profile for all users submitting content?
You cannot really lock the folder to a profile. I assume you want to make sure that users don't change the metadata, that you want it set to whatever metadata was specified by the rules in that profile. The way you could do it is if your users use desktop integration and they are just dragging folders or files into a folder, then if you have the metadata form pop-up enabled for that folder, you would just drag the file in and it would automatically get the field set from that profile. They would not have an option to change it. However, if they do get in through the web browser, you cannot lock the profile. They would be able to change. Or in that profile, you can make fields, you can have rules to make fields editable.
Okay. Next question coming in from Jeff Foster. That's 2 questions, or 2 posts really. Is framework folders compatible with PS5 and PS6? Additional, also want to clarify the previous question on using framework folders with WebCenter framework application and or WebCenter spaces on PS5 and PS6.
Framework folders is only available in PS5, which is 11.1.1.6 and later versions. It is not available for PS4.
For PS6 as well as PS5.
It's released. PS6 is not currently out yet, but it will be compatible moving forward.
Okay. Next question coming in from Carl Sykes. You talk about rebuild the index, that was on slide 32, sorry. We enabled subfolders. It's collection rebuild or fast build?
It would have to be the collection rebuild because you are actually adding metadata values to the search collection. It would have to add the path to the folder itself for every piece of content. So a fast rebuild would not do that. You need to do the full collection rebuild.
Okay, thanks. Are there any benefits or differences between query folders versus queries built with web layout editor?
Well, I can see a couple. They will give you the same content, whether you do a query folder in framework folders or whether you use a folder or a query in web layout editor. The first advantage to using a query folder is to be able to do the mass metadata updates like Cordell had talked about. The second one would be if your users are using desktop integration, they can access the query folders through their desktop integration client, where you would not be able to access the web layout editor folders there.
Okay. That's a pretty straight difference right there. Another question coming in from Skip Shar. Is there any specific integration for Site Studio sites?
I bet Site Studio can use that, but we'll need to get back to him on that one in the community forum.
Okay. I'll take a copy of all the questions asked here and send it off to you as a text file. You have his email address and can directly get in contact with him.
Perfect.
Nicholas Denanda, will it be possible to move, copy several files in one operation?
This is possible through the web browser. You do have to select one file at a time and use the move or copy from the actions menu for that particular content item. However, if you're using desktop integration again, you can multi-select a number of files and do a move or copy on all of them at one time.
Okay. Question from Al Hoof. Is the folders retention only option to delete content? Can a user be notified to approve before deletion?
No, the only option is to delete content. This is considered to be just a very light RM, records management functionality that was included in framework folders, so it's very limited. And if you do need further options, then you should install the full records management product instead.
Okay. From Christopher Owens, do your map folders work with framework folders?
They do not currently work, and I did just check that there is an open enhancement request already asking that this be implemented, so it is being considered currently. But right now, they do not work with framework folders.
Okay. Do you, can we post, or is the enhancement request number available from anywhere?
Yes,
So
I will post that in the thread.
Okay, we'll post that on the community then. Question from Neil Katoros. We are using folders G on 11.1.1.6. Is framework folders compatible with WebCenter spaces? You already had the question, I think.
Yeah, it will be in the future version, not now.
Okay. Question from Maria Grosdanek. Is the way to prevent users from creating, deleting folders to remove the link create delete, or is there some user permissions based on roles or groups?
This could be limited by the roles. You can give users, for instance, delete permission to a role that would allow them to delete the folder. If they do not have that role that gives them delete permission, they would not be able to delete the folder. And the same with creating the folder. If they do not have root permission, they would not be able to create a folder.
Okay.
It's done through standard content server security.
Yeah. Will I be able to access link or shortcut content types in WebCenter portal document viewer task flow?
It will be available once Framework Folders is supported with Portal and Spaces. So that also addresses the question that's 2 down as well.
From
Jiri. Yep.
Okay.
We'll make sure to pass this along to product management as well, since it was asked so much about support for Portal and Spaces for Framework Folders. They are aware of it, but the more people we can have will help the cause. So.
Yeah. Kelly asks, is the folders G functionality of web mapping a folder going to be available in frameworks folders?
I believe that is the same question as the URL mapped folders. Again, there is an open enhancement request requesting that, and we will post enhancement request number in the forum thread.
Okay. Another one from Carl Sakes. Do DIS work with framework folders? Any specific DIS version?
I mentioned it quite a bit. Desktop Integration Suite does work with framework folders, and would need the 11G version of DIS.
Okay. Question, Saroj, are real? So folders G is being deprecated, and moving forward there won't be any new dev work on it. Oracle will support it, but won't add new features to it. Is that correct?
That's correct. It is still supported. For example, as we've stated many times, the Spaces integration still requires folders G at the present time, but we are not, development is not adding any new functionality to folders G.
Okay. Question coming from Alexander Schulze. Is there? Yes, there will be a recording for everybody who still asked this. There will be a recording. We put a link up in the community in the thread for this webcast. You can also go to the Advisor Webcast schedule and archive node, select the section for WebCenter content. I think it's middleware, and go to the archive tab in there for archive 13. This will be available from within 48 hours, I think. So we will finalize the recording tomorrow, and it will then be uploaded at some point later. The link will be available. Next one from Cheng Wang. Framework folders supported in WebCenter Spaces 11.116. I think that is the same thing again.
Yes, correct. It is currently supported. Same thing with Garima.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Question from Gunther Thielmann. Is it possible to search recursively for folders?
It's not. You can search recursively content in folders, but if you're searching for folders themselves, you can only search at a particular folder level, and it will not search subfolders. Okay.
Question from Donna Stanwand. Can a user add content to a folder and have an interactive experience? For example, the title needs to be different for every piece of content in the folder.
For the interactive experience, if you're using desktop integration, you can set a flag on the folder that says Enable Metadata Prompt, and when the file is dragged into the folder, a prompt will come up to the user. So the user can see the metadata that will be applied and can change it, if that is what is being referred to as interactive. In the browser, there is not an interactive experience. However, where it says the title needs to be different for every piece of content, if you try to check a piece of content in, will fail. If the folder already has an item with that same file name. When we say title, it's important to differentiate. We don't mean the metadata field called title, which is the doc title in Content Server. We're talking about the file name itself. Just like on a Linux or a Windows machine, you cannot have two files with the same name in the same folder or directory.
Okay, that covers that. Question from Brian Davis. Within as many classes use an image library folder, so that when in contribution mode selecting the image link, the query is run in the background, returning the images in that folder. Being this work in Firefox, would we need a custom element form?
I'm sure we'll need to get back to Brian that after we talk to some of the Site Studio support folks. We'll need some more details probably. We can put that on the forum.
Okay. From Deepak Praveen Raj, folders G won't allow duplicate content to check in, but framework folders allows duplicates. Not that we have an option shown on the site.
Still not have the same content name, but there's options now of what you want to do when it detects conflict. You can have it make a copy of, right? So then it changes the name. Yep, that's for moving or copying, or it will override it and delete the original, or it will skip it. That's when you're moving or copying.
Okay. Question from Igor Fortunato. Will WebCenter portal PSN be released this year, and will it already be certified to use folders from WebCenter contents? Assume that will go out to different community, is it?
Yep. Need to follow up with that team.
Okay. From Aldona Swetchevsky, sorry for mispronouncing this. Related to matching content names checked into the same contribution folder. Contribution folders create a new version of the existing content item. Will framework folders create a new version of the existing content or check in the item as new item?
If you are using Desktop Integration Suite and you drag in a file of the same name where one already exists with that file name in the folder, it will ask you if you want to replace that file, and what it does is makes a new revision of the item. If you're doing it through the web browser, I believe you just get a message saying that you do not have a file with the same name. It does not give you an option to create a new revision. But I can test that out and answer that in the forum thread to be sure.
Question from Lee Cornelison. Repeat on profiles with folders. Can you lock a folder to one profile? Oh, sorry, that we already have answered.
Just to make sure, the short answer was no, you cannot lock a folder to one profile.
Okay. Question from Garima Dubi. Will support folders G withdrawn after framework folders are fully functional?
We do not know the current management plans for removal of folders G support, but most likely it will correspond to the grace periods for certain versions under the Fusion middleware policy. Right now, we are still in support for folders G, and for as we know, the future as well. We have not been told any differently. So, but we will, as soon as we know when that's going to be pulled off of there, that'll probably fall on the Fusion middleware lifetime support policy.
Okay. Question from Günther Thielemann. Is it possible to create and manage search folders by Desktop Integration Suite?
I believe you can create a query folder there, but I would have to test it to find out. I will be sure to post the answer in the forum.
Okay, I'll tag that follow-up. Question from Neil Katos. Will expired content be viewable in the folder view that shows all content rather than the latest release view?
No, expired content will not show up there. The difference, content you would see in the all content compared to latest release would be content, for instance, that's in workflow that is not released yet, or content that is waiting to be converted would be shown. However, expired content will not be shown in either view.
Okay, thanks. Question from Igor Fortunato. Will CMIS support change due this year?
Repeat?
I'm not sure about that question. Will CMIS support change due this new feature?
I'm not aware of any change in that, but we can tag that for follow-up as well, too.
Okay. If you could specify that question a bit deeper, that would help us. Next, Maria Grostanek. Is there an option to hide users folders?
There is not currently an option to hide the user's folder.
Okay. Question from, we have answered that. If the PowerPoint will be available, yes. It will go along with the recording link. We will have a link to the PowerPoint slides in form of PDF. PowerPoint itself will not be available as for download, but we transfer them into a PDF file, and you can download that at the same place where we will have the recording links, i.e. in the community and in the KM. How migration utility work? Is it on a per file basis or on the whole content, and how fast is it from that buyer?
Well, first of all, how fast is it is very dependent on how much content and how many folders you have in your system. So it's very hard to determine. How did it actually work? It will not change anything in folders G. So it will not delete any of the folders G folders. It does not take that folders G folder and change it to a framework folder. It will create a new framework folder for every folders G folder that you have. Use the same hierarchy, and will then reference the documents inside those framework folders. If you run the migration a second time or a third time, every time you do it, it creates another whole set of framework folders for your entire folders G hierarchy. And as stated before, you can run it multiple times, and you can delete any old migration runs once they're done. The folders G folders are not modified in any way.
Okay, so it's read only. Zem Ampofo. Does info delete removes it permanently or only expired it? I'm hearing that delete from doc info page will delete it, not sure where from.
So if you delete from the doc info page, that is actually removed permanently. From the folders action menu is when we expire it. That's the difference.
Okay. I see. It would be good if that was visible in the face, this difference. Is there a way to customize the output of desktop integration?
Okay, assume they are asking about the desktop integration suite is a few different components. The Windows Explorer integration is the one that's most used, the desktop integration client, and you can customize the columns you want to show, certain columns of metadata or display different metadata. I don't know if they were referring to other items besides that, but as far as I know, that is the only part you can customize.
Okay, thanks. Question from Dan Hayden. When propagating fields that allow multiple values, will it override existing values or append to the existing values?
Actually, an override is doing an update, so it will not retain any existing values. You would need to specify all of the multiple values that you want put back in when you're doing it.
Straight answer. Question from Ken Schiller. Explain again how changing metadata via folders differs from changing metadata via archive.
Sure, very straightforward question, common request. So in Archiver, when you are doing an update, the main thing that complaint or limitation with Archiver was that you have to actually archive all of the content out and then archive it back in to do the update. So it was very inefficient essentially in that regard. So with this method of doing it, when you change it in folders, it's really just a straight database update. We don't have to archive all of the content out and have all that file system activity of copying the content out for what essentially is a simple update to the database. So,
yeah, okay. Be way faster. Anya Simchuk, is it possible to search for folders? I know we can specify the search within folders, but can we search for folders themselves?
Yes, you can search for folders themselves. You can give any criteria you want. For instance, search for all folders that have the public security group. However, again, it will only search for folders at the folder level you are doing the search from. It will not go into subfolders and search for folders within subfolders.
Were you able to access the link shortcut content types in WebCenter portal document viewer task flow?
I think question already, yes.
Yeah, that's a duplicate. Please, if you could question in only one. We can see all the questions coming in. We have had a number of duplicates here already. If don't post your question multiple times, we will get to it at some point. List is quite long here. Question from Vijay Gordabai. When the content is expired or deleted, is the shortcut to the content in any folder removed automatically?
Is deleted. If it is deleted, the shortcut is also deleted. And I believe the same thing happens if the content is expired, because the content will no longer appear in the folder or in the browser, but I would have to test that to be sure.
I'll take that as follow-up.
Thank you.
And can I use a recursive search on text search?
That option is only available for content and only available if you're using Oracle Text Search, not on just the standard full text search.
Okay.
If you are using Oracle Text Search for your search collection and you want to do a full text search and include subfolders, you can do that as long as you set the config entry.
Okay, one question came in here. Where do we find the community forum? I just posted the answer. It's on http://communities.oracle.com. We show this in the in one of the next slides as well. Can the value of metadata in a profile be set based on another metadata field value selected during a document check-in? The relation between metadata fields is maintained in a database.
Yeah, the profile and rules engine is a very complex piece of functionality that's done with script code, and there's lots of things you can do with that. So the short answer is that yes, you will need to do a little programming with the rules engine, but that's fully documented in the script reference guide and also in several other KM notes and things like that. So, but it does take a little bit of, you have to write a little bit of code to get the derived values to be able to specify for the profile.
Okay. Question from Canathe. Will WebDAV integration work on Mac, Windows, Linux at a system level, i.e. mounting a WebDAV folder, for example?
Theory, it should work. Depending what version of the OS you have, you may run into difficulties. For instance, Windows 7 has changed quite a bit. Microsoft has made some changes, and we have found some issues with using a folder from Windows 7. In Linux, you would have to probably use a third-party client, and it may or may not work. In theory, again, if it sends the requests that we're expecting that a regular WebDAV client sends, it should work. But otherwise, our desktop integration suite, the DS client, is fully supported.
Okay. Is it documented?
Yes.
Okay, we'll give you the answer to that for the expected version. From Saroj Ariel, to use retention feature with framework folders, do you need to install retention manager component, or is that built into framework folders?
It's right into framework folders. You do not need to do anything with retention manager, but again, it is only light RM feature, and it is limited.
Okay. Question from Enno Buis. Are the service names used in framework folders the same as with folders G?
Oh, they are not. That's what we put in the documentation on the last slide. There is a services reference guide for the new service names. So if you need to change some of your code accordingly, you can go back and look at that thing that we put in on that slide.
Okay. Yeah, you see the same the name of documents again. Question from Niklas Senanda. In the context of bring your own device and the need of users to access WebCenter content from any device, also where desktop integration suite is not installed, it would be very useful to provide all the functionality that is available in desktop integration suite also on the web interface. Is that planned?
We have the answer to that directly. We would need to follow up with product management on that to see what their roadmap or their plan is for that. But we certainly can pass that comment along.
Okay, so essentially make AS and with the web interface be on par in functionality.
Yes.
Okay. I'll just follow up. Question from that's a duplicate from will UCM subscriptions be enhanced to include subscriptions to folders, subfolders in addition to content?
Once again, that would be a question for what the roadmap is, which we do not know. But if we certainly could open up an official enhancement request if NEO desires that to be opened up. But we'll follow up once again with product management on that one as well.
Okay. There's a duplicate here from Donald Steinmont. Question from Javier Ductor. Is it possible to create a shortcut to internet URLs? I think that's a duplicate as well. So. Question from Nikhil Gokhale. Framework folders have any limits on the numbers of folders or content items they contain?
No, there's no limits, which is one of the main drivers for the creation of the new framework folders functionality.
Okay. Question from Mike Terrella. Does a user folder automatically get created through DIS or only when logging directly into the managed server?
When user logs into the content server, we do check to see if the user folder already exists for that user. If not, we create it. And that does happen whether they log in for the first time through the browser or through DIS. It would be created if it does not already exist.
Okay. Question from Maria Grostanek. Role permission are both for folders and items. If I only need to prevent user for creating a folder but not preventing user for check-in items.
They are asking if you can use security to prevent the user from creating a folder, but still allow them to check in items to an existing folder. I do have the concept of different security now on the folder and on content checked into the folder. So if your parent folder has security set where the user cannot create an existing folder, that would prevent the user from doing that, but the metadata is allowing them to check content in, that is also. So the short answer is yes, there is a way to do this.
Okay. Question from Niklas Nannes. Suggestion you shouldn't use the label title for the metadata field and file name for the file names. Make it more clear for users. I can
And if you look in the browser at the content in the folder, there is a title, or there's a column named title, and there is a column named file name, and they do use the correct words in there. I think maybe sometimes in our presentation we might have said title when we really meant file name, but in the product itself they are differentiated.
All right. Okay. Question from Javier Doctor. When retention folders is configured, items are deleted or expired?
Deleted. When the job runs to the items, they are deleted.
The schedule hits, or when you click the run now, then that's an actual delete.
Okay. Question Daniel Kozlowski. What about Mac support?
Actually, I believe it is supported. I assume they're talking about WebDAV access from a Mac machine. And if so, I believe it is supported, but that is one I would have to follow up on to verify.
Okay. Question from Deepak Praveen Raj. Is it possible to create folders users who have read privilege? I assume if only have read privilege, can they still create folders?
If read permission, they would not be able to create folders, no.
Oh. Pretty much is it. Okay. With folder G, we access the WebDAV folders using a URL in Windows Explorer. Is that still the case with framework folders?
It is. Again, with Windows 7 client, we have run into some difficulties. So it's recommended you use DIS. However, if you have problems using web folders with the Windows Explorer using the URL, we are looking into those and investigating those.
Okay, thanks. Last 10 questions here, maximum, because we have to stop at 12:30. Anything not answered by then will be put into the community, and we will answer that in written form, together with all the follow-up questions. How do you replicate framework folders between content server instances? Can you use folder structure archive?
No longer use folder structure archive. Instead, in Archiver, the archive you're creating for the content, you will add the folders tables to that archive, so they are also replicated. I believe there are 3 tables to add, and there should be a KM note about that I can look up and reference.
Okay. Question Neil Katoros. Does framework folders use D collection ID? Will migration from folders G retain the D collection ID field?
It does not use collection ID. However, when you do the migration, we do not change anything in folders G, and the content that actually use the X collection ID field to tie it to a folders G folder, the X collection ID field is still populated with the folders G folder. So it actually is still tied to that folders G folder. If you would go back to folders G, your content would still reside in those folders.
Well, an important follow-up with that is that we do not touch those tables after you've switched framework folders as well, too. If you want to fully remove folders G from the system and you do not have plans to go back, it's important that you would need to do a little database cleanup to remove those tables.
Okay. From Nikhil Gokhale, is there any role-based viewing of folders so that users can view only particular folders?
The standard security applies to folders and content.
Okay. Okay, from Maria Grosdanek. If you have set up full text search in config CFG, would full text search field be shown in search files page from folders menu bar?
No, you cannot do a full text search for files in a folder. The folder searches actually use database metadata searching. Even if your content server is set up to use Oracle text search, when you do a folder search or a file search from the folders page, it is using database metadata searching, so you cannot do a full text search.
Okay. Question, Amit Brambad, are there any known problems in email check-in from Outlook 2010 using Desktop Integration Suite?
Actually, I'm not aware of any problems, but I do not really work with the Outlook integration piece of the desktop product. So it's something we would have to verify with the group who works with that product.
Or having a problem, they can certainly open a service request and we can investigate.
Yeah, always an option. Question from Sarah Ariel. Folders G had local folders features to replicate folders and content items on the file system. Does Framework Folder offer similar feature?
It does not currently. I do not know if there is an enhancement request for that or not. One only be opened. Features desired.
Second to last question from Amit Brambad. Can we have approval of workflow for deleting content?
Need to be a customization involved there to be able to do that. Right now, when you delete the content from document information page, it's a permanent delete. There's no pop-up that happens or no secondary approval.
Okay. Last question for today. When a content is deleted or expired, are all the shortcuts to that content item removed from all the folders?
We did answer that already. When content is deleted, they are removed. When content is expired, I believe they are removed, but I am going to test that out to be sure.
Okay, that's great. So concludes our Q&A session for today. I'm gonna here. This is actually the screenshot of the KM node for the recording and for signing up. You may have been there. The 740966.1 for the advisor webcasts. You choose your product area, and it goes out to Fusion middleware. And that's where you not only find the current schedule, but also the archives. And there will be a button, Archive 2013, and that is where the recording of this will show up in a couple of days.
And we asked in the next couple of days to answer all the follow-up out on the community forum. And once again, I just want to thank everybody for attending, and we appreciate it.
Just mention here a couple of newsletters as well. The 1347075.1 node is for the Fusion middleware support news, and there's also an index node for all past newsletters, 1347149.1. And that concludes our session for today. Thank you for listening in. Thanks to Cordell and especially Patty Rail to join us here on the Advisor Webcast. We hope you found the webcast valuable, and we look forward to have you join us again. Enjoy the remainder of your day.
That concludes our conference for today. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.